Hello, everyone. This is Phelan McPhalen, and I want to thank you for joining this podcast. My co-host Lance Conley, with whom I usually broadcast, he's going to be gone for a few weeks. He's got some personal things to attend to, so I'm going to be doing a few myself. However, I think you'll enjoy them. I got some special guests coming up, amongst whom is my present guest, a man whose name you might be familiar with. His name is Stephen Whitsett. He's been in a hyperpreterist conversation with hyperpreterists and partial preterists too, and futurists as well. Since about 2014, he's got a pretty extensive background, and we're going to be talking with him tonight about his theological positions and also about his opinions on full preterism in general. Steve, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Thanks. I'm doing good. Ready to go.
That's wonderful.
Just finished dinner, so I'm ready.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, I was looking through your resume, your background, and you've got quite a bit of background. I know you grew up in the Four Square Pentecostal Church, so that's pretty interesting because I think Sam and I've had Sam Frost on a couple of times, and I think he told me that he had grown up as well in the Four Square Pentecostal church. Is that true?
Yeah, we've talked about it before. That's where he got his start and moved on a little bit later on. But yeah, we've had that in common. I think that's what drew the two of us together, is we got that common background. And right now he is teaching, or has been teaching, at the Southern Region Life Bible College. And I've done for one semester. I was teaching with that online, and it's to Papua New Guinea. So I know that he's been doing that also, and so we've had that in kind of common. But yeah, been able to teach online to a Bible college there. I like Foursquare in Papua New Guinea, so that was been kind of fun and exciting.
That's wonderful. And you're also working on your doctorate as well. I believe you said that you were working, your dissertation is going to be on the time texts. Is that correct?
Yes, it's going to be a compilation of 4 different elements, but the beginning of it centers on identifying time markers in order to extrapolate a correct chronology. So it is going to deal with not necessarily every passage that a full preterist might say is a time marker, but it's going to deal with the concepts and the words, like last days, end of time, day of the Lord, hour of the Lord, Son of Man coming on clouds. It's going to be doing a mellow, telos, and engus, near, coming near. So
wow.
It deals with those words and then with those passages. And then we look at the nature, all the passages that talk about it, which include 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, 2 Peter 3, on and on and on. We go through all of those kind of together. Then I go and I compare the statements of the early church fathers, and we're going to look at those and related to what they believed about chronology and nature. Then near the end of the chapter, I'm doing a kind of an apologetic against the different views, post-millennial, amillennial, partial, and full preterism. Not so much dealing with historists or idealists or anything like that, but those main things. And in the process, of course, I am interacting with every book that could have been written. And that was what was great about Preterist Archives. I was able to get some resources off there that go back to 1889, and all kinds of resources. I got a list here. It's just a big one, but it goes through and it kind of chronicles through the progression of thought and ideas and teachings of full preterism, and especially partial preterism, because I don't think anybody actually, they did, but not anybody, of course, taught the full preterist system that's here today.
Right.
So, and then I wrap it all up at the end and kind of put it together.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. And I remember Preterist Archive used to be a really great site. had a lot of resources, had a lot of articles, and it has some modern exchanges too, which were really great because scholars would weigh in. Some of the world's top scholars or whatnot, they would weigh in on things. They would submit articles. Todd was a very busy man at one point. Anyways, that's great. That's great to hear, and I'll be looking forward to reading that eventually when it comes out. What would you say that your overall eschatological paradigm is? If you had to describe it in just a sentence or a few words, how would you describe it?
Well, when I first got into it, we mentioned that before. When I first heard about it, I gave answers that weren't good enough. I wanted to get more into it, more detail, because some of these questions and these challenges that were coming from full preterists regard some minutia details and stuff like that. And well, how does that work with this and this, and try to put it together? And so I recognized right off the bat, I need to go back to school. So that's what I did. I went back. And as I looked at the Ante-Nicene fathers and all of that, and saw what they saw and how they explained things and everything else, really what it came down to was historical premillennialism, Chiliasm. That was there. Why was it there? When did some of the other views come along? Partial, of course, later on, but like postmillennium came in the 1950s in response to the social gospel. You had Darwinism when it came through with the Plymouth Brethren, which was much earlier, of course, and then amillennial that came in theonomy. So there's this progression, but it's that historical premillennialist. Now, when I first started to respond in dealing with full preterism, I came to the idea, understanding that, okay, all of that was fulfilled in 70 AD. To me, it really was. We'll talk about that more later. But that was considered partial preterism. So you're partial preterist. Well, partial preterism, in most circles right now, people claim, okay, so it's a pre-AD 70 book of Revelations. And then you believe this, and this. And I said, no. I believe the Olivet was fulfilled, but I have a late date for Revelations, and I believe all of that stuff is future. And so playing around with it, I thought, let me come up with a different term. And I did this tongue in cheek. I called it middleism. So, I'm in the middle of partialism. See, I'm part partial and part future. I'm right in the middle there somewhere. And I played around with that. But I got a website, middleism.org. And that's what I basically explain, is that this is tongue in cheek. So there have been people that have criticized, well, you don't even know what you believe. You come up with something completely new. No, this is nothing new. This is historical premillennials.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. And I've been a historic premillennialist for quite a while myself, for probably, I think, 15 years since I left full preterism. And so, yeah, it's definitely, I think it's the most coherent system. And I think there's something in what you said about going back to the beginning and seeing where they started from. So basically, I know you've written a couple books. Tell me about the books that you've written concerning. I think you did one, didn't you do one? It was about full preterism.
Yeah. In fact, this is funny. I'm going to throw this out there. Edward Bundy, I don't know. He's all of a sudden showing up a lot with Sam and everybody else, and commenting and things like this. And I just happened to look at it, saw something last night, and I about laughed my head off. He put a meme up with his website's thing down here at the bottom. So he had this all cut off, but he put this as a meme. And where'd you get that picture from? That's from my book. Where did he get? And he tried to send a link to me, but it didn't work. I don't know. So I still don't know where he got it from. But yeah, so now my pictures that I made, this is my, is making its rounds around the internet. But what I did was, I'll put it this way. I have a little bit of a dyslexia. So I put things together differently than people do. I think things. I see all four things that I want to talk about. And so when I start to talk about one, I'll mix in there three and then go back to two and then carry on into four. And so in order to overcome some of this thinking and this writing, because if you're going to write a dissertation, you need to get it a little bit better. So what I started writing. I started writing articles. I started writing a blog. And then just writing anything that I could on full preterism. And I put it on Amazon, Kindle, and all that, and just to get feedback and think about through things. But it was all intended for me to learn to really write better and to continue to improve. And so that's what I've been doing. So basically, yeah, I mean, I got the first one there. I don't think I put it out that it's closed off right now. The Cold Case Against Full Preterism is the one that Sam Frost recommends when he wrote the foreword to Steve Gregg's book. He put that down in the notes. This one, was the one that's been a little bit older. I haven't opened that up yet, but the last one I did, and see, some of these are a compilation of each other's work. So there's chapters in there that repeat itself and things like this. And I did that deliberately. And then the last one is pretty much a more compilation of everything put together. But that's what it was intended to do, was just to help me learn to write. I don't care about the criticism. Somebody in there that didn't like me went through everything in the book and put the biggest negative review they could find on it, even though they haven't probably read it whatsoever. And you might find just one review of each one of these books, and it's from the same person, and it's as negative as you can be. And then the last one I wrote, these are articles and essays, papers and things that I've written for school that I've put in here. And some of that you can find on academia.edu. They're published also there. And
Wow. That's
yeah, there's a few there. Some of them are repeats and sections and stuff, but it was all for the point of learning to really write better.
Right. Well, wow, that's amazing. And I didn't realize, I know the Cold Case Against Full Preterism, that's been out for a little while. And I've actually seen that on eBay, of all places. It's been on eBay. I was going to get a copy of it.
Really?
Yeah, I'm trying to get copies. Eventually, I'm going to get everybody's writings, because I still haven't read Steve Gregg's book either, and people have been recommending that to me. As a matter of fact, I'm ashamed to say it, Stephen, but I still haven't read Sam Frost's book either. So I'm kind of need to catch up on my reading. But yeah, I'll get around to them eventually. So what I want to ask you, I guess, right now is just we could segue into full preterism afterwards. Is so what do we, because I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of experts, I guess you'd call them, over the last few weeks, actually over the last few months. And I always ask them this question. It seems like there's a hesitation on the part of a lot of scholars and a lot of Christians to look for any kind of upcoming thing in our future. Do you think that I know since you're a premillennialist, I guess I can ask you this with some sense of freedom, but do you think that there's anything is coming up in our near future that we need to look out for? Maybe something, I'm thinking something prophetically or of eschatological significance?
Boy, I am one person that is absolutely hesitant in saying about anything, right around the corner, or this is about to happen, or this is about to happen here. And, a lot of them, of course, you're hearing that, oh, this fulfills this and this fulfills this. I'm not looking at that. In the prophetic sense, Revelation starts with the horseman, and you're talking about peace, and then peace is taken from the earth, and then wars break out, infighting. Then you have pestilence and the economy, and then war itself that breaks out between nations, and you have death. that's kind of the general idea that I see is what's going to happen at the end. Now, is that a time right now? It very well could be, but could it be still even in the future? Yes, because like in World War I, everything was thrown into disruptions and everybody's thinking, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, it's right around the corner. These are the signs. And it didn't happen. And they did the same thing during World War II. So no, I avoid that like the plague and jumping in there. And in one sense, I'm not seeking to get people and followers. I'm not really seeking to get notoriety and fame or really, and I'm responding, of course, to somebody's comment about me. That's not my goal. There's nothing on. In fact, somebody said I tried to hang on to Sam Frost's tailcoat, and no, it's not that. It's. I've recognized right from the beginning when I first met Sam that he has a way of communication that I actually emulate. I would love to be able to communicate the word the way he does. So if you want to learn how to communicate pretty good, follow somebody, listen to them. And so that's basically what I've done.
Right. And so your work in the field of apologetics, defending the Orthodox faith against hyperpreterisms, I feel pretty important because, like you said, there's, you're not looking for necessarily, what could come next right around the corner, but we all are trying to defend the Orthodox faith. And we know that there's a lot of heresies and false doctrines out there. So you did some work in the field, and you've been doing some work in the field of combating hyperpreterism. Do you feel that now this current situation with Gary DeMar and how it seems like he's trying to, well, it almost seems like he's trying to merge like full preterism and partial preterism, or he's like trying to blur the distinctions at the very least. How do you feel? Does this change the landscape? Is this something that you feel, is there an area that you feel we need to move in on? Or is it pretty much the same arguments we've always been using?
I'm responding now to, as I told you earlier, I listened to DeMar's 3 podcasts and responding to this letter and the comments that he's making about the letter and these questions and things, and why he won't come out and answer them directly. And one of the things he brings out was it was Steve Gregg's book about the 3 views of hell. 1, man is annihilated. That's it. You go there, you burn up, you don't exist. 1, the internal torment, or 1 that you spend your time in there and eventually you get purged of everything and you get to go to heaven afterwards after you're taking your time. And what DeMar says is, well, people are accepting those as and the way Steve presented, of course, was these are 3 orthodox positions that you can have, but each one of them is different as night and day. And Gary DeMar's idea is that you have these 3 ideas. Well, which one is right? Which one is the biblical one? If only one of those is biblical, the other 2 are heresy. So why isn't it we're not picking out those other ones and sitting there saying, even according to the Westminster Confession of Faith, it says it's eternal torment. Well, then the other 2 positions, those are not orthodox. Those are not evangelical or anything else. They should be thrust aside and cast out and not even considered as any type of truth because they're not biblical. So you get the idea there that what Gary DeMar is saying is that you're asking me to pin it down and you guys don't even have it pinned down. So he's questioning certain things. So why is he being the one that was castigated against that?
Yeah, I could see that angle.
And my first reaction to that was because you're talking a lot with and listening to and allowing full preterists to have a large voice with you. And I would see why people would have that type of a reaction with that, because you're given a platform to full preterism.
Right. And it seems like he is doing that. I mean, I've seen him, well, I've been following his ministry for quite a few years now, off and on. And it just seems like he does seem to be legitimizing full preterism as a system. He's afraid to come out and call it a heresy. Where do you see this all going, Steve? I mean, do you see this going as, do you think there's going to be a resolution in the near future? Or is there a solution to this whole thing? Or do you think it's just going to keep getting worse?
I don't see it as it getting any worse as it is right now. I pretty much, probably about a year ago, decided I pulled out of every Facebook page, really, where a lot of these discussions were going on. The one that I was on, there was a number of Eastern Orthodox. And some of this discussion started to go around those particular positions. And I was the lone voice against it. I objected to the idea of praying to saints or praying to Mary or looking at as Mary as somebody that we should venerate. And I spoke my piece on it, but that was not, not exactly well accepted and everything else. So I completely pulled out of that. But then in my discussions then with full preterists, what was starting to happen is that people were not really reading through. They were not doing their homework on people that they were talking to or bringing up. And because, and this is kind of the bottom line, I think, is that when I've talked with Don Preston, and I've talked with everyone, William Bell, Ward Stanley, every one of them over the last, especially Don Preston, I've talked with every one of them at some point and everything, and asked some of these questions, and I keep getting different answers, and these answers keep evolving, and things keep getting invented on the spot. Things like Steve Basden, who in a broadcast, I don't think he's on the air anymore. I think they finally took him off. He did one of his morning podcasts. He went after the gay community and just land blasted them and calling them faggots and everything. He just used that language. I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to be taken off so maybe he has. But their positions are changing so much. And it's like Steve was on there teaching that, well, if angels are in heaven, they sinned and they got cast out. So when we die and we go to heaven, we still have to be careful because we might sin. If we sin up there, there's no redemption for us. We can get kicked out and go to hell too. And right. I thought, oh my gosh. And the arguments that they're creating in response to what we bring against them. You got into it with Lance and talked about it, about the marriage. Remember that?
Yeah.
Why? What was the marriage? Why is, in the resurrection age? Don Preston teaches that it's the Levitical marriage rites that are no longer valid in the new covenant. We can still get married, but not under those laws. That's what the issue is. And you're going, I don't know where you got that from. Totally missed the mark there on that one. But as you talk to these people, and I had a debate with Basin, and I explained to him my version of what is resurrection of the dead. Anastasis necron, the standing again of a lifeless corpse. That's how Bible defends it, argues. Paul speaks about it, what it is. And he turned around, and we were talking a little bit later about, well, the souls in heaven, in Hades, when Christ ascended, he took the saints with him into heaven. Oh, you believe in resurrection then? Yeah, I do. No, you really believe in resurrection, the soul's going out of. No, I never said that. But that's what he continued to argue, that I'm double talking because I can't understand that the resurrection of the dead is the souls coming out of Hades. And no, you're trying to define that for me, and I didn't do it that way. And it doesn't matter how much you explain that to them, it's almost like one ear and not the other. And other people, of course, it's the same thing. They have no frame of reference. You can talk to your blue in the face, but they just don't have this frame of reference of how to put this together, or anything else. And so it just got completely frustrating to try and talk to people. And that's it, I'm done. I hang out with Sam. And then Ken Gentry, DeMar, I just listen to him. Once in a while, I'll make a comment and ask a question or something like this, but I am not challenging any of those guys and what they say. I'm just absorbing what they're saying and what they're teaching. And like one of DeMar's question is about the question of the great white throne judgment. I understand the total context and the frame of what Sam and Jason and all those are talking about with the final judgment, where all men stand before the judgment seat. And DeMar is going, well, is that really accurate? Is that an end of the world event? Is that really what it's supposed to be? And okay, I understand you're asking those questions, but the idea that he was presenting there was, if sin and death is supposed to completely end, but all these evil people are in the lake of fire, then sin and death haven't been eradicated yet. And I'm thinking, where's the logic in that? Because you're saying the evil people are still there, and so therefore evil still exists and God hasn't gotten rid of it. So how can you say that God gets rid of evil? And the premise is what's completely wrong. Sin is the wrong things that we do. I don't think anybody in hell is sinning. It's a little hard to.
Yeah, it is.
You're not making choices. You're not living. You're in a state of dying. But that's his thinking process. So how can you sit there and say it's an end of time world thing where sin and death are finally conquered and gotten rid of and done, if it still exists in the lake of fire? Mm-hmm. And where did that kind of a question come from? Where does that thinking come from? Where do you get the idea that's a valid premise to assume that in hell, evil still exists?
Right.
So that's where I'm kind of sitting.
That makes a lot of sense. And those are some good arguments. And I guess I want to ask you is, so when you're looking at the resurrection of the dead, and I'm talking specifically in the New Testament passages, are you going to, and somebody asks you, well, what is, how can you prove that the physical resurrection, the scriptures teach a physical resurrection and not one of these, spiritual, allegorical, or a resurrection of souls from Hades? Would you go by, like, say, the literal, like the dispensationalists do, by like, well, this is the literal meaning of the text? Would you make just a strictly textual argument, or would you get more into like make it more of like a textual / theological argument? Would you change that? I mean, how would you go about proving that it is physical? Because as you know, these guys, they've got these systems that they spin, and some of them they could spin them pretty good. So how would you go about doing it? Would you use a more of a textual approach or more of a theological approach?
One of DeMar's little problem is that he said nobody has actually done the exegesis on some of these things, like the whole Olivet or the whole this or the whole that. And he goes, I've never even actually done the exegesis work on 1 Corinthians 15. The papers that I've read, going back quite a few years, there are plenty of scholars who've done the complete exegesis on the Olivet, all the way through the whole thing. I have done the complete exegesis on 1 Corinthians 15, looking at the words, the meaning, and then seeing how they're associated with each other in context. And that's where I usually go. And that's where I think you got to start with the rules of hermeneutics, meaning of words. So again, anastasis necron, the standing again of a lifeless corpse. This is a technical term. It was first coined, used, made by somebody who saw a dead body come out of the grave and start walking again. And these are examples, of course, back in the Old Testament. One of the most famous ones, with Elijah, where they threw the body in with the bones and he touched him and he comes back to life. Well, he's a dead body. Now he's dead again. You go to Isaiah 26:19, your dead shall live. The earth will give birth to the dead. It's there. Not in a real concrete form, but when you get into Matthew, I'm starting to build this case about what are the different examples of resurrection outside of Christ, of course. You have Matthew 27 is that's the first one that comes to mind, after his resurrection. The dead bodies, the stones were rolled away, the dead bodies came out and they were seen by many. This is one of the most unusual passages in all of the Gospels because it was written in hindsight. This is right in the middle of, Jesus just died. He hasn't even really been buried yet, but here Matthew makes this comment about the resurrection of these other people that happened. And why? Why did he do that? Why is that there? Why is it nobody else ever mentioned it or anything else like that? And so to me, it's building up that case first of the language, which then the theology. That's what I was trained in. Life Pacific University, that's what we did, was systematic theology. And then when I went on later, it dealt with more of the languages and the other things. So that's where I go from the exegesis to the theology.
Oh, okay.
And then the examples of scriptures. And to me, one of the biggest problems is I will have people ask me a question about such and such. And I go, well, doesn't that scripture right there? And I'll bring up the scripture. Doesn't that answer that question for you? And they'll go, wow, I never saw that before. I don't mean to be, and I would say the same thing about Sam. Sam does this too. When you bring up some kind of topic or anything, and you want to start talking, our minds start to go right away. We've got this scripture, this scripture, this scripture. Which one do we want to bring out? Which one do we want to talk about? How do we, work through this? Because to us, it's like all right there. Like with the resurrection of the dead. Where was that topic really first introduced? Matthew 10. When the Sadducees came to the Pharisees and said, hey, there's this guy, married, he dies, didn't have any kids to the brothers. So now you got 7 brothers all married to the woman, and finally the woman dies. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Well, the first inherited idea is that means, okay, so he premised this with Sadducees don't believe in life after death, Pharisees do. So the Sadducees have framed this in a Pharisaical thinking of dead bodies come back to life. People come back to life on earth. Otherwise, why wouldn't they be married, right?
Right.
And then Jesus answers the question. And then when you look at the Luke passage, he adds one little phrase in there. And then, okay, see, this is how my mind thinks. Matthew was written to, and this is interesting, I'll throw this out there. According to Eusebius, you've heard of the Q theory and all of that, that there was another, he mentions that Matthew wrote, first of all, a gospel in Hebrew.
Right.
Then Mark writes a gospel, who is a part of those things, but very abbreviated. Luke, who was not there, doing this all hindsight. He's getting it from everybody else, but he's writing it to the perspective of 2 other Greeks to help them understand. They don't know Hebrew idioms. Matthew does. He's writing to Jews, so he's going to use those idioms. Heaven and earth will not pass away until every jot and tittle is fulfilled. Okay, so the preterist says, well, every jot and tittle is fulfilled, then the heavens and earth of God pass away. Look at the same passage in Luke. He explains it's much better. Luke says it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than any one of the jot or the tittles of the law to be abolished or gotten rid of or not fulfilled. So you go back and you think, okay, this is a contract. Jots and tittles have to do with the fine print. Well, the contract was made with Abraham and his seed, not seeds, seed. The law was added 460 years later. It wasn't a part of those agreements that they made. I will be your God. You will be my people. You will worship me and I will protect you. When people come against you, I will defeat them. But if you fail to keep what I say, then we're going to have troubles. And that's the promises. And so in the covenant, you look at it, nobody kept the covenant perfectly except Jesus. He fulfilled every one of those promises. Therefore, every jot, every tittle was completely fulfilled. And so did the earth pass away? No. It's an idiom. It's an idiom. It's a Hebrew proverb, in the same way that we'd see, when pigs fly.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of the process where I take through and I think through, and you can see where that goes.
Right. So I guess when we get to the new heavens and new earth and Revelation chapter 21, this is an argument that full preterists will often make, is because they've placed pretty much all of the prophecies in the New Testament past fulfillment. The only thing they really have to give us our commission, show us what our commission today is a lot of them will jump to Revelation chapter 21, say, well, you see, there's sinners outside the gates, and sometimes they'll collate that with Isaiah chapters 65 and 66. Do you think, being a premillennialist, I know there's different aspects, there's different subsets of premillennialism in regards to Isaiah and Revelation. Do you think that the new heavens and new earth in Isaiah are the same as in Revelation chapter 21, or do you see those more as being millennial passages?
That has been kind of the core of really what I've been working on for the last 8-9 months, is 66 and 65. Well, here's the bottom line issue is that amillennial and postmillennial say that there is no kingdom of God that comes down here on earth. Doesn't happen. And then, of course, premillennial says it does. I'm going to go on my computer here real quick, and that way I don't want to misquote anything too badly. I tend to put things in my own vernacular at times, but Zechariah 14, I can start right there. The first 3 verses talks about a siege that takes place. Half the city will go into exile, the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. When Babylon captured Israel, did God go out on that same day and defeat Babylon? It was years later.
Right.
So, verse 4, on that day, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives. Can't be the same day. So we have to say, okay, well, this is a different day. He's coming to fight. You read through there a little bit, and the Lord my God will come, and the Holy Ones with them. Okay, where is that used in the New Testament? That's 1 Thessalonians 3:13, I believe it is, right at the last chapter. His second coming, God will come with all his saints. Okay, so you see my way of going through. And then Revelations 19, he comes with his saints riding, wearing white linen on horses. Here he is coming with his saints. And so that's kind of how I kind of put through things. Okay, so on that day there will be no light, cold, eastern sea, king over the earth. 11, and it shall be inhabited. Okay, so on this day that he comes, Jerusalem shall be inhabited, for there shall never again be a degree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. So God comes down, second coming, and now he's talking about days after. Jerusalem will continue to exist, but it will dwell in security. It's not dwelling in security right now, but right. It is. Okay. Then it goes on a little bit further. Even Judah will fight at Jerusalem. And then down to verse 16. I brought this up with one post-millennial aliens guy, and he looked at this verse, and I talked with him about it. And he goes, wow, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. Verse 16. Then everyone who survives of the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feasts of booths. That implies the continued, well, you're premillennial, you know. And then in chapter 12, it's almost a repeat, a little bit different angles and things. On that day, the inhabitants of Jerusalem held strength from the Lord, the host of the God. That can't be 70 AD. On that day, the Lord will protect the inhabitants. Well, if the city is divided in half, taken into exile, and half left there, I don't see that as protection of. But when I look at Revelations 19, I see him coming with his army to protect.
Right.
And then it goes on from there. So if I'm saying those two things about the millennium, then there are the days that go after. So everything that we find in Isaiah 66 and 65 is describing this continued existence of God, Christ ruling from Jerusalem in a time of peace. And this is a major problem between ICE and some of the other ones in the arguments that I looked up there. See, they believe that when Christ comes, all of the nations, all of the people, according to Revelation, they're all, but it doesn't say that. It says those who participated in the battle, those are the ones who were killed.
Right.
But Zechariah 14, the survivors of these nations. So here it is, the resurrected saints. Because in Revelation 20, Jerusalem now is what? The camp of the saints, the city he loves. In no way in 70 AD was Jerusalem the camp of the saints. They fled to Pella. So now he comes. He's dwelling. This is that golden era. You've got sinner and saint living. You've got him ruling over the nations with a rod of iron. That concept of a rod of iron is not a staff. My rod and my staff shall comfort me. The staff was there for protection for the sheep, but the rod of iron was to get people into line.
Right.
You don't have Satan deceiving the nations anymore. And so I see Isaiah 66 and 65. And that's because the tricky thing is, it says there, I will create a new heaven and earth. Well, so does Isaiah, Revelations 21 and 20, a new heaven and earth. So why are they not the same? And well, because you got sinners living over here with the resurrected saints. But in Revelations 21, everybody's already been judged. At the end of Revelations 20, the great white throne judgment, where everybody stands, the sheep and the goats have already been separated.
Mm-hmm.
We're all in heaven.
Right.
And then the new Jerusalem comes down back to earth in a restored kingdom, a restored earth where everything is restored back to the garden, including the tree of life kind of imagery that's there. And those on the outside. Now, if you look at the chapter division in 22, there's a very sharp division that says, I'm coming quickly, and he kind of ending the vision. And then he's speaking again about those on the outside. Well, who are those on the outside? I'll turn with you. 22. In verse 6, and he said to me, these words are trustworthy and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, has sent his angel to show his servants what must soon take place. This is an inclusio. We saw that in verse 1. Here's the end of that vision. By using this inclusio, there's the end of the vision. Behold, I am coming soon. Blessed who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. Again, that's ended. So who are on the outside? Dogs and swords. Where are they? In one sense, they're all in hell. They've already been judged. Every man's been judged. The sheep, the wheat and the tares, they've already been separated. So tares and all that are in the lake of fire, while the wheat are there in the New Jerusalem.
Right. And that's
So
wonderful. And one passage, Stephen, that I've heard a lot of hyperpreterists use, and maybe you could shed some light on this, because they'll often use it not only against futurism, but also against partial preterists. And it's, I know you're gonna hate me for using this verse, but it's Daniel chapter 12, where
mhm.
he's talking about, at that time shall Michael, and some of them will fixate on that phrase at that time and say, well, this was fulfilled, this was just a figurative description of what happened during the reign of Antiochus. And then some will completely ignore that expression at that time. And then they'll sort of work this into AD 70. Regardless, it does say in verse 2, it says, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. We all know the passage, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they say, well, there you go. There's the general resurrection in Revelation chapter 20. Must have been in the past. Therefore, full preterism must be the true system. How would you go about explaining this passage? Because I think I was reading one expositor, and not a classic well-known expositor, said this is one of the most difficult passages to really interpret from an expositor standpoint. How would you go about rebutting the hyperpreterists in their interpretation of that passage?
The first thing I would say is, okay, so the resurrection was supposed to take place 70 AD. Did it happen? No, obviously not. And so let's look at all of this. In handling the argument, I don't know if you've read Sam Frost's book, Daniel Unplugged. He goes through this. He goes through this and explains, of course, why a lot of that concerns the previous chapter, concerns those times and things like this. But you can't lump in all of these things to that same time frame in the same way, because exegetically it doesn't. But that has to do more with the Hebrew, and he is much better at the Hebrew than I. I chose New Testament Greek and try to keep in that, but as my thing. And so I'll be honest with you, it's kind of explained that way, that in the wording there, it's almost like this is the result of your people. He's talking about your people will be delivered, your people will be saved, and how your people will be. It's the resurrection. It's not talking about the time frame. It's saying your people will be delivered through these hard times.
Right.
And the final deliverance, of course, is resurrection. And that's kind of the gist of what he gets across, because it's not supposed to be included within the 70 weeks down below. I mean, there's a cutoff there that on that bottom part. And so this top part, those first few verses should be kind of linked up with the previous two chapters. And so when we look at that, we look at of course, the Septuagint. Many of the New Testament writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, would have probably been reading mostly from a Septuagint, a Greek Old Testament, because there's a lot of quotes of even Paul that are framed in a Septuagint way. And one of those things would be like with John, the just and the unjust. And he talks about it in Matthew 5, and scholars have put that together with Daniel 12 and 3, the just and the unjust, in a single hour. An hour is coming when God will. Then you go on and you go in an hour, in an hour. So a lot of people have put those, that means then the unjust and the just have to be raised at the same time. Then you get to Revelations 20, and those that were beheaded came to life. But even in First Thessalonians, it's always talking about the just being resurrected. It never talks about the unjust being resurrected for judgment. The just are being resurrected, and then judgment happens on the earth. And then, of course, first Revelations 20, those following verses, then the rest of the dead are come to life. And so there's this separation there that I see, that it is not both groups at the same time. So how would I go back to what John said? An hour is coming. Well, that hour is not talking about, it's a time. It's just saying there's a time coming when the just will be resurrected, and there's a time coming when the unjust. It doesn't mean it's in the same time frame. That's one way of understanding and interpreting it.
That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I've heard other people explain it the way you have. And there's another passage that I want your opinion on, because it's another important one, but it's so simple that I don't know how anybody would miss it. And that's Acts chapter, I believe that's Acts chapter 1, where they see Jesus Christ ascend into heaven. Now, I've actually been on Don Preston's forum for quite some time, and I've actually had people tell me, Steve, that they actually did not see Christ ascend into heaven. And I guess they were confronted with that passage. They had been denying the bodily, the continued incarnation of Jesus Christ for so long that they finally were confronted with that passage. They knew they had to do something with it. And what they did was they flat out denied that the apostles were even beholding Jesus Christ ascending into heaven. So is that, and I know that phrase, hon tropon, in like manner. I know that phrase. I know there's certain ways that they twist it sometimes. I know that you are conversant in New Testament Greek. Do you care to explain to us a little bit when he says in like manner? Does that mean in the same manner as physical manner, or what does that mean?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the physical body whatsoever. It just has everything to do with the way something was done. And the tricky thing is maybe some people don't miss it, but who wrote Acts? That was Luke. Go back to the last chapter of Luke. He talks about the ascension, that they were talking. He went on a little ways, and then they saw the Son of Man being taken up into heaven. You put some, and then I haven't looked at this in a while, but he uses one Greek word there for ascending up there and what they saw. And then he uses a different one in Acts 1. That kind of makes a subtle nuance about that and makes a difference. And it had everything to do with what they saw. They saw him go up, and the clouds received him out of sight. Didn't take him out of sight. It received him. So he went into the clouds, and of course, then he disappears from their view. So that's why they're standing up. I think it was Bondar in his book where he actually argues, like when Moses was taken up in the clouds, that Moses went to the top of the hill, the clouds came down, and he was taken from their sight.
Right.
So he wants to argue that the clouds came down.
Oh, okay.
And then he disappears in these clouds and things like that. And there's a couple of people that just, no matter what, the idea for them is that Jesus was taking the clouds and out of their sight. So that means, therefore, when he comes back, he's going to come back in the clouds. Well, that means coming back in judgment. So when you see the judgment happen, what you're seeing is the second coming of Jesus. No, he said he would come down in like manner in the same way. And it just means from up to down. We went from down up, whatever way you want to do it. Yeah. He was down and he went up. And then when he, was up, he came down. And then, of course, Sam and I, we've talked about that. Daniel 7, 13 and 14, his ascension. Use other passages to support it. I mean, scripture's not alone. And it says there that in that ascension, that's what Jesus is doing, is he's being presented before the Father and ascending and sitting down at his right hand. And so I don't think you can't prove bodily second coming from out of Acts 1. You can't do it.
So what would be the best passage to use if I were to say, and I know there's some passages that I could use to prove that Jesus Christ is still incarnate in a physical body in heaven. But how would you go about proving that with the minimal amount of fluff, I guess you would say, because you always say you only had 5 minutes and you had to prove it and you didn't have much time. How would you go about proving his continued incarnation in a physical body?
2 verses.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, Colossians 2:19.
Okay. Okay.
Or 2:9. I get my numbers mixed up. In Christ dwells the divine nature bodily. Bodily is somatikos. This form of the word, the accent is different. It's not on, I believe it's on the cos on the end of it,
Right.
the kappa, omicron. And it's not used anywhere else but it's decided, it's an adjective that describes the verb. The verb is dwell. How does the divine nature dwell? Bodily form. Bodily. That word there has to do with flesh, the soma, the body, somatikos, soma, body, obviously, So it dwells within the divine nature. Then that word verb dwell is present tense. It's not past. Actually, it's the idea that it happened in the past and it continues on into the future and aorist. It continues. It hasn't changed. That's the first verse. The second one, Romans 6:9, Christ being resurrected cannot die again. Death is only for the human body.
Right.
The spirit doesn't ever die. So if the body is the one that died and he's the one who first died, and you're looking at the other things that Paul said, that he will raise our bodies up by this power of the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
He will raise our bodies up. So the idea there is that this body, the soma, is being raised up by the power of God, and it cannot die again. So if it cannot die again, then we're talking about the body. The body, again, it was the body that died. It wasn't the spirit of God. It was the body that died. So if he cannot die again, and this is kind of leading into what Bonder said about, and what they've said is that Jesus' body had to burn up.
Right. I heard that. Yeah.
In heaven. And they literally say second sacrifice. And Hebrews all the way through there, 9 and 10 says what? Sacrifice, a single sacrifice for all time. He didn't have to take spirit blood into heaven. His blood was poured out on the cross. And the biggest thing, when it comes down to that, in Matthew 27, it points out is that the temple veil rent in two from top to bottom. Well, the veil, when you look at and you go back to Moses, you study what that veil was. There was like 12 layers or something to it. And you start out with the color of man. It represented man, his sin, his need for redemption, and And by the time you get to the last one, purple, royalty, God, into the presence. So if God is tearing that thing from top to bottom, the veil that has kept us from being able to enter in is sin. Sin has been dealt with. There's no longer a barrier. Christ has come out of that, the Holy of Holies, so that now men can fellowship with him face to face and see him face to face and dwell with him. And that's so how you know that the old covenant passed away. The new covenant is here. He's the one who is the mediator of a new covenant. Anyway.
Right. So I know you've got your doctorate you're going to be earning your doctorate, I believe you said in June. So what are your plans after that? Do you have any plans to launch out into a ministry or do some more teaching or pastoring? What are your long-term objectives?
I want to go teach. That's what I'm hoping to do, is go to a university and teach. Where that could be, boy, who knows?
Right.
But that's the goal. Yeah, I want to be able to sit there and teach. I've pastored people and everything else, and I've just had to come to the idea and realizations. Preaching and pastoring is not really me.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching is. and more prophetic in a sense, in a way that I approach things is like, what is God saying now? What's he saying? I'm not here to preach you and make you feel better or help you get over your anxieties. No, stop what you're doing, knock it off. And so I've got that kind of a character and everything else. And so that doesn't always go good with nurturing people.
Right.
You've got cancer, lung cancer. Okay, I'll pray for you and I can believe God to heal you. But did you quit smoking?
Right.
Did you quit vaping or whatever it was that was causing some of this stuff? Well, no. Well, then why am I praying for you? Got to heal you if you're going to, continue to damage yourself like that. And I'm just using that as a generic sense because people make those bad choices and then they want God to help them escape from the bad choices or the consequences of their bad choices. But yeah.
Well, I certainly wish you congratulations in advance, Steve. I think we've wrapped this up. It's been about an hour. Is there any last words you'd like to say to the viewers? Anything you'd like to say about full preterism in general or theology in general before we leave?
I probably would and shouldn't do. This is something that went back in my brain. Thinking about things. Some people have challenged the idea of, and I know Sam differs on this and other people. Well, if you notice I talk about Sam, it's because his opinion accounts to me. So when he says something and he has an opinion about something, I will take that very seriously. I put a lot of trust in our relationship
Right.
versus Gary DeMar or Gentry, because I can interact with him and learn from him. And so that's what I value more than anything else. But I almost lost my train of thought there. How do I put this? Seriously, train of thought here. I'm going off in the left field and I need to be back and right. Differences, opinions and things, they're slight and we're able to talk about them. It's supposed to bring me back. Pause for a second. Think.
Okay, take your time.
You pause it? I can't. What was it going? Okay, so what it is, so I've read a lot of different books and everything else, but the one book that has probably influenced me the most has been N.T. Wright's Surprised by Hope. And he covers this whole resurrection. He deals with, and I haven't seen anybody else really deal with it before. The meaning of the word parousia, it has two meanings. It's used two different ways in those times. It had a very technical meaning. The same thing as epiphania and that, but it is N.T. Wright. Well, okay, so I did my studying on the early church fathers, and all of them agreed that the Olivet was fulfilled. Barnabas, a lot of them. Clement, there's comments about all the way through about it being fulfilled, but still, we're looking for the second coming. Well, they've read the Olivet. Why aren't they saying that's about the second coming? I mean, we've all interpreted it that way. Why didn't they do it? And so that's what I started to look at. And it was N.T. Wright that just right on the old noggin. He says things are often misread that way. Daniel 7:13 is what Matthew 24 is what Jesus was quoting from. And that is not about a second coming and coming down. That's about him going up to the Father and sitting down at the right hand of him. And he also makes some clear statements about there that in the Olivet, he never talks about the second coming, never talks about it whatsoever. And then I look at all the arguments from different scholars, Pate, Vlock, all of them about Revelations. And there's always, well, we can agree it here, or well, this verse might be talking about, but we're not quite sure, lightning and well, that, and then 24, well, that's, well, not, yeah, 24:30 might be talking about second, but what about, and then some will put down to verse 34 and 36. That's where it's talking about the second coming. And so there's just so much confusion. And so he makes it real clear is that the Olivet Think about it. He's talking with the disciples. They can't even get the fact that he's leaving. So why should he be talking about a second coming when they don't understand that first part? So yes, there's allusions of language that talks about a second coming, clouds coming on clouds, because naturally Acts 1 talks about Jesus ascending and disappearing in the clouds. But the Old Testament, Jesus is quoting Old Testament. He's not quoting from Acts. And Old Testament clouds of judgment is always about God in judgment, not where he's coming down. Mm-hmm. So even Matthew 26:64, it's from here on out, you will see me sitting at the right hand of good judgment, the right hand of God, and coming on clouds of judgment. Coming on the clouds means judgment. How does he sit and come at the same time? He doesn't. And so it's an army that comes. That's just like the Babylonians. So I cannot find within all of it and say this is a real clear thing that's talking about the second coming. And that's something me and Sam have talked about, and we pretty much agree with on that part, that any reference that you see about the Son of Man coming, but it was N.T. Wright that kind of put me in that thinking. And kind of agreeing with what I've already kind of studied and that conclusion that I came to. And I think that was one of my crazy theology. How crazy is it?
Right.
When I started talking about it, I started asking Sam about that a few years ago, and then, oh yeah, and then there's this kind of thing that started among the discussion groups and everything else, talking about the Son of Man. And so now you'll find a lot of them talk about, when you ask them a futurist that's debating full preterists, they'll talk about the Son of Man. For Daniel 7:13-14, it's not about. And interesting enough, of course, in the same chapter, verse 10 and through there, they're talking about the great white throne judgment, and the books were opened and things like that. So I guess the final word when I deal with preterism, the good thing is that a couple of people have complained that I've been kind of a little bit snarky in my answers and things like this. They've said that and everything else. When I get certain questions, okay, that sounds just like a full preterist asking me that question there, as if they're trying to trap me into something. And so I'll come back sometimes, and I apologize to anybody I might have done that with, but I really do. I mean it. I don't mean to. But then I, have thicker skins. I'll bring up Brian Stokes. Me and him have gone back and forth. And you probably haven't heard of him. Don't know him?
No, I know him.
Okay.
I know him. Yeah.
So we've gone back and forth. And I got snarky with him on something. Come on, think about this, resurrection of the dead. And I kept hammering him. And finally he comes back in an instant message that says, oh, now I see. And now he's no longer a full preterist. And right. I go, that's what I'm hoping for. And one other person, I'm not gonna mention her name. Because I haven't gotten really permission or anything else. But the same thing, she's defending it, but we privately talk about it, and we got on the phone together for about 3 hours. And when it came all done, 2 days later, she goes, I'm done with full preterism. I'm not in that anymore. And so that's my whole thing, because I've watched in my life how a bad theology destroys, where couples we're not taking our son to the daughter or to the doctor. They're sick. God's going to heal them. Then I watch him die. That's not good. That doesn't, to sit back and watch something like that happen. My background, real quickly, and I hope you don't mind me doing this. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, my dad got saved, and then the rest of the family got saved. And, Dad wanted to be a pastor. So he immediately, as an older guy, says, where do I go? I can't afford to go to school. I've got a wife and 5 kids. I want to go join a ministry where they'll teach me to pastor, teach me to preach, and help me with my family while I'm doing all of this. So he got and contacted a pastor in California. And we sold everything that we had. We built this little camper thing, and we're going to go to California with our bills, join this ministry. And my mom and dad was on the phone with this guy over that year, talking with him personally before we left. That man was Jimmy Jones.
Hmm.
So we were going to go join that ministry. We got off into Omaha. We're originally from Indiana. And we hooked up with our uncle, who was a Foursquare pastor. And so we kind of got into something. And then back in the 70s was when the shepherding movement was going on. And so my family got caught into that. And my dad never bought into the terrible stuff of that, and he objected to it, but he was in it. He was committed to the people. And so we saw this whole thing come around and how it eventually just completely fell apart with the shepherding movement. That was Derek Prince, the Fort Lauderdale Four, New Wine Magazine, which today is Charisma Magazine. I mean, it's all the way through. And so I've lived in a commune with 30 other people in one house where, you got to get up and pray in the mornings and the afternoons and the evenings before your meals and do this, do that, and everything else. I've been through all those roads. And then living out in California where I was and associated with, and I don't say this braggingly whatsoever, but my brother-in-law was on staff at Church on the Way with Pastor Jack Hayford, a church of 10,000 people.
Wow.
Who right down the street was John MacArthur.
Wow. John
MacArthur and him were friends. They used to meet together for lunch at least once a month and talk. And that's my example, of that. So I was very much in touch with a lot of people. In the same room with Chuck Smith, John Wimber, I met these guys. Right. And then at Church on the Way, you had Pat Boone, you had all kinds of these celebrities. And so I was around all of that. I was around all these great people, Cedar Peter Wagner, other authors. I was around these guys. And then when the third wave broke out, I was there for those. Arnott, Cheon, I was there with those men and sat with them and talked with them and things. And over the years with all of this and the studies, it's just like when somebody says something and presents something and it's off, there's just something that kicks me like a mule and said, nice guy, great guy, but that comment there, do I need to say it? No, there's something off there. And okay, we'll just see how it plays out. And the third wave, we saw what happened to that. When I saw people barking or manifesting and things like that, and well, God's just working on them. There was no accountability. And some of these people were manifesting demons is just the plain way to speak it. And there's no accountability. And then it completely broke down. You've got things that happened in Florida, the Brownsville, people don't hear about it. You had a woman who was supposed to be slain in the spirit, landed on a speaker and was killed. God didn't raise her back from the dead. She died right there on the stage. Right. Things like this are not heard. But why are those things happening? And it's because there's something wrong and we're not dealing with it. So the whole Asbury thing, I was very, very, what's going on here? And I'm glad the way they handled that and what is going on. They didn't take ownership of it and said, they let God do what he wanted to do with people, and they backed out of it. And I thought that was the greatest thing. Let God do what he wants to do in whatever places and stuff. So by talking about that background, though, you see that I'm very careful. And so when I came into full preterism and heard about that, okay, I'm not falling for it. I'm not, no, I'm sorry. I know better. So with all that said, yeah, that would be my final word. We'll talk. Anybody wants to talk, I'm willing to talk. If there's something you don't understand, that's fine. But don't let somebody else's opinion from some other YouTube or some other thing who's got issues with me be the thing to judge me or my, theology. Sit down, talk to me. Why do I believe what I believe? And yeah,
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you for your testimony. I really did enjoy talking with you. Thank you for your theological insight. I think we're going to do this again and
anytime. Yep.
sometime soon. And thank you, everybody, for watching this. I will post this to my channel and I'll give you a copy too if you want. But thanks again for tuning in. Thank you again for your thoughts, your comments, your observations, your critiques. Hope to be back later this week. I've got a discussion on the burner with a full preterist universalist of all people. So hopefully I'll be doing that soon. And then when Lance comes back, we've got a few in the can. We've got one with Elton Holland or Holon. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. He'll be joining us to present his papers on the resurrection and his other work against hyperpreterism. We've got another one coming up with, I believe, some Greek Orthodox scholar, I can't remember his name. And then we got another one coming up with one of the IO proponents. We'll be talking to him as well. So just keep tuned and we'll talk to you soon.